and welcome to episode 8 of the Email Deliverability Unfiltered expert video series. Today's episode is dedicated to a very relevant and painful topic for some email marketers, which is deliverability issue mitigation. I've said it before, and I will say it again, email deliverability is hard. There are so many reasons why your email might not make it to the intended recipient. They can be technical, related to your infrastructure, authentication, or something within your email code. They could be data-driven. So maybe your emails are getting blocked or they're going to the spam folder because you're blasting to basically everyone you've ever come in contact with, or worse, you've scraped or purchased a list somewhere. Or maybe you're kind of doing, everything right, following industry best practices and sending content that you think or hope that your audience is going to find value in, but you're still facing issues. It happens to the best of us. It's nothing to really freak out about just yet. But how do you know what's causing your deliverability issue? And more importantly, how do you resolve it? So we've invited Tamara Bond, Delivery Operations Manager from Digital, to join us for an episode on issue mitigation to help you figure just that out. So Tamara is a Delivery Operations Manager for Digital. She's one of my favorite people to follow in the industry because she knows her role so well. She just really understands delivery and deliverability, and she's able to speak about it in a way that I find, people can really understand. You can kind of connect to that. So I'm really excited to have her with us. You can tell that she cares about her customers and she's really helping them get to the inbox in the ways that are possible. There are some that I think people think are possible, but they're kind of just these magic buttons that don't really exist in deliverability. So we're going to try to work through those. Pulling from Tam's LinkedIn page, where she describes herself far better than I could. She is Digital's mail server tinker-in-chief. She's got over 7 years in bulk email delivery specifically, as well as a depth of knowledge in more general digital marketing and SaaS technology. She takes her work really seriously, but herself, not at all, which is something that I absolutely love. She's passionate about data-driven development, quality products, and taking a scientific approach in figuring out how stuff works, which I also love. She's involved with anti-abuse and collaborative efforts, both at home and in the wider industry and email ecosystem. So you might have seen her bouncing around at MOG conferences and things like that. She's a self-proclaimed mistress of the dark arts of email delivery and a power MTA wizard. She's enthusiastic yet cynical product manager, experienced finder of weird edge case bugs, and she's also a Lego enthusiast and also an aspiring Batman villain. So I guess I first of all want to say that I can get on board with basically all of that, except for that villain part. I guess, Tam, knowing the role that you play within the anti-abuse world and just the larger industry as a whole, I guess I don't buy that. So you need to tell me a little bit more about why you think that you might actually be an aspiring Batman villain.
Yeah, I mean, I always see the villains of Gotham as a product. They're a product of the city. They're a product of everything that's going on around them. They're a product of the corruption that exists within Gotham City. And they exist kind of to turn things on their head and to highlight all of those injustices, the corruption, all of that kind of thing. And I think that's what I mean when I say aspiring Batman villain, being a little bit off the wall, a little bit fun. I sometimes say uncomfortable things about things like people purchasing lists or capitalism in general. Terrible economic system. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from when I say Batman villain. I'm not into blowing people up and stuff, but blowing up the patriarchy, always down for that.
I like that. Okay, cool. That clarifies things for me because I see you as one of the good guys. I don't think you could really be a bad guy, but you're right. Okay, so
maybe more of like an anti-hero, I guess.
That feels more fitting. Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, I have another question for you. I'd really like to understand, knowing that you've been in this space, this deliverability space, email space for a while, I'd really like to understand, what is your favorite part about our industry? Why is it that you do what you do?
Yeah, right. I mean, nobody goes to school or university. I mean, certainly nobody I've spoken to in the industry went to school and was like, yeah, I'm going to work in email. That's the thing. Well, they should. I mean, it's an awesome career, an awesome industry. But yeah, I fell into it. And the thing I love most is I'm a problem solver. I'm an engineer at heart. I like to see the problem, see where we want to be, and get from A to B. And delivery and deliverability just offers me the opportunity to do that on a daily, hourly, minute by minute sometimes, depending how much I'm flying by the seat of my pants basis.
Right.
So I get to problem solve on so many levels. I get to problem solve obviously with working alongside the team and with directly with customers. I get to problem solve when it comes to servers and what on earth they think they're doing. When it comes to getting emails through to mailbox providers, that's always like a fun problem solving. There's just lots of like experimentation, trying things, iterating over stuff, improving it. And I just like, when I first started working my last ESP, and I got into kind of like QA and finding bugs and stuff. And when you find that like reproduction case for a really edge case bug, it's so satisfying to be able to do, you do this and this and this and this and this, and then everything explodes. I've loved that. And yeah, so delivery and deliverability, that's what I get to do every single day, is just like find problems, fix problems, smack my head against the wall repeatedly while figuring out the problems. And that just, I don't know, for me, that's a pretty decent day job.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's funny, there are a lot of people in our industry who feel the same way, where it really is kind of, they love problem solving. They love putting together puzzles. They love playing with Legos, things like that, right? Like where it just is that kind of journey to figuring something out, especially like you said, when it's a hard problem to solve and you've tried everything, and then you finally find what it is that's causing it. It's just, yeah, it's ultimately so satisfying. So that's awesome. Great. Well, and I guess that brings us into the topic for today. So might as well just kind of jump into it. I guess, we are really here to help our audience diagnose and resolve their delivery and their deliverability issues. And, I think, as I previously mentioned, your title with Digital is Delivery Operations Manager, right? Not deliverability. That's a delivery manager. So I guess, can you kind of, as we start off this conversation, give us your explanation of kind of what the difference is between two of those and why people should really care about that difference?
Yeah, so, in real brief, when it comes to delivery, that is getting an email, or I also do SMS delivery as well. So it's getting an email or SMS from the sending server to your receiving server. So you're sending an email to a Gmail account, a Gmail recipient. It's getting that email from your ESP's mail server onto the Gmail mail server. That's delivery. Deliverability or inbox placement is all the stuff that happens after Gmail has accepted that email. So that's where you get into all the things, the fun things of asynchronous bounces and filtering, and then fundamentally inbox placement or promotion tab placement, or, God forbid, spam and junk foldering and that kind of stuff. So the delivery side of things is obviously really super important, because if you're not delivering your email, if Gmail, Hotmail, whoever is rejecting your email outright, even when you just try and make an SMTP connection into that server, there's no way for a recipient to even go and find that email in their spam folder. That email has simply not been accepted at all. And that can be due to some really like core problems with a marketing strategy. And until you address those really core issues, inbox placement is going to be neither here nor there, because you've got like a serious problem. It's also deliveries are a really fun and interesting area. At least it is for people like me. Others find it super frustrating, because it's an area where mailbox providers are constantly changing the goalposts. Reputation comes into it a lot, so better senders can send more and send faster and make more connections and more messages per connection and that kind of thing. And for senders not following best practices, they reel it back in, but they never tell us with the email. SMS is quite nice. Providers tell us you can make this many connections, send this many messages, and it's all very, very civilized. Whereas email is a bit more of a dog eat dog world, and so you don't know what the limitations are going to be. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people who try to do in-house email make, rather than people who are using some kind of ESP, is not getting that delivery experience on board, getting an experienced mail server engineer on board who understands delivery and deliverability. They set one up and then they forget about it, and they realize like 6 months, a year, 2 years down the line that suddenly they're not delivering, or they're not delivering optimally. Their program has grown and they can't deliver fast enough because they haven't tweaked around with their settings, and then they go in and try and make changes. And if you don't have a lot of experience when it comes to delivery, when you try and make settings changes, you can do things like, you know, completely screw up your delivery to like Verizon Media Group, for example, just by changing one single settings connection. So delivery is the first step in inbox placement. So if you're falling over at that first hurdle, everything else is just by the by. You need to get over that first hurdle.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's something people don't really think about very often. It's like, you know, we sort of see deliverability and delivery as the same thing. And it's like, well, my mail's not getting to the inbox, and so it must just be a deliverability issue. And it's so hard to kind of figure out, is that on the front end where it's actually a delivery problem, or is it really something to do with your sender reputation or something after that fact? So yeah, thanks. Awesome. I guess I'm curious, like, how often would you say, like, how much time do you think you spend? I mean, obviously your role is very focused on the delivery aspect, but how often do you dip into what happens after the fact, like the deliverability part of it?
Oh, all the time. So my role in delivery operations, which is the team that I manage, we sit exactly firmly in between service operations, who are managing all of like our infrastructure we use on a day-to-day basis for the whole company, and the deliverability team, who handle deliverability and compliance and anti-abuse and all of that kind of stuff. And our role sits literally 50-50. So I'm talking with deliverability team as much as I'm talking with the technical guys in like the back end service ops side of things. So I'm in deliverability all the time. And deliverability, inbox placement, reputation has such an impact on delivery, like coming back. So if a client is struggling with inbox placement, especially if they're on a dedicated IP, but regardless, if a client is struggling with inbox placement, almost certainly sooner or later, they're going to start struggling with delivery issues as well. Because it gets to a point where your reputation gets so bad that a mailbox provider sees your sending domain during that SMTP interaction. It's just like, yeah, no, I'm not even, no, go away. I'm not touching that. So yeah, and you know, that's sort of like the late stages of it. In the medium term, you know, you can get things like throttling and slowing down of sending. So, you know, we get people saying, you know, why is it taking so long for my campaigns to get out? And it's like, well, you know, this is what's going on. Reputation's not great, and that's impacting your delivery. So yeah, so I'm constantly involved with the deliverability side of thing and troubleshooting from a deliverability point of view. It's really important to what I do. There's only so much I can do with mail server configuration. There's no magic configuration. There's like myths in delivery and deliverability, isn't there? There's the bat phone, which is the phone that we all have to the mailbox providers, where I can just phone up Gmail and be like, "Meh, accept my emails." And that's not a thing. And then there's the idea that if you're having delivery or deliverability problems, it's your ESP's fault because there's magical mail server configuration. You just put this in the configuration, just put this in the header, and then everything just goes straight to the inbox. And it's like, no, that's not a thing either. So because I don't have that magic server config, I have to be constantly involved with the deliverability side of things as well to make sure that I'm working with the team, that we are working with the customer to make sure that communication is flowing backwards and forwards, so we can really get to the root of, okay, what's the problem? What can we try? How can we fix this?
Right. Awesome. Yeah, I love that. And I guess, you know, this kind of bleeds into sort of like my first question as we get down the rabbit hole of issue mitigation. Yay. So I guess, can you walk us through sort of like some of the common reasons, or I guess maybe mistakes that senders are making that tend to cause deliverability issues? Like why are they even popping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest causes is not seeing your email marketing strategy as a holistic program to achieve a goal. So not knowing what your goals are with your email marketing strategy, or even the strategy for a specific marketing stream. You know, what is the goal for this? Do we just want people to open and read and absorb some information? That's where they are in the sales cycle. Are we trying to instigate some kind of action, like making a purchase, engaging a service? Like, what is the goal, and how are we measuring success is really important to taking this holistic view. But at the same time, you have to be able, there's like a micro and macro view to kind of balance you have to hit. So you have to be able to see this whole picture, but you also have to be able to go into the granular, like micro details. So how are we collecting data? How are we managing that data? What kind of content are we sending? What kind of data are we collecting about people and their interests and what they're engaging with? And how are we then targeting that? Is it working? Like this constant process of iteration, like do it, see what's successful, see what's not, try something different, keep iterating over this process. I think like stagnation in email marketing programs is one of the biggest problems that I see that cause deliverability issues. And most of the time it's a stagnant data issue. So either, we set up this form on our website ages ago, technology's moved on, there are new tools and techniques for confirming opt-ins, preventing typos, that kind of thing getting into our lists, and that form is just the only thing that's kind of feeding in, and they just let that stagnate. Maybe they're just like sitting on data that they've been collecting over the last 15 years, and they never ever like cycle anybody out again and say like, hey, this person bought a mattress in the last 6 months, they're probably not wanting a new one yet for a little while, or that kind of thing. And also, with like stagnation of targeting and segmenting. So your recipients and who you're sending to, the demographics are always going to be changing a little bit as to who's interested in what time of year is it, what are the latest kind of technologies, what are the latest trends out there, what are people like leaning more towards at the moment. Like for one thing, like I still see a lot of brands targeting by binary genders, for example. And it's like, it's 2021, dude. Like that's not, let's expand this a little bit. Let's start collecting some more data about these recipients. Is this really a binary like man or woman thing? Or is this more of like a mask fen kind of thing? And is there a little bit like different data we can start collecting, start targeting these recipients in a different way that's going to be more authentic for them and like encourage them and therefore drive up our own like goals, because we'll be making a different level of connection with these recipients. So stagnation and this lack of like holistic and being able to go into the micro details, I think are like the most kind of common things. If we really get down to like brass tacks, when there's a deliverability issue, it's almost always something in that ballpark.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think it's, it's one of those, like, I always just say, send emails that people find valuable in whatever way. And it really is the truth though, because it's like, right, you want to get them to engage positively, opening, clicking, doing things like that, engaging, converting eventually. You want to reduce your spam complaint rates and even your unsubscribes. It's a sign that they're not really happy with the content they're receiving, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. So I guess, okay. So we know kind of how maybe you're triggering a deliverability issue, but I guess what are the ways that people would perhaps become aware of that issue? Is it just a complaint from their CEO saying it went to spam? Is it a block? What is it, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways. I think it comes down to kind of three main ways. One is they'll notice a reduction in performance. They're not hitting their targets. They're not generating the revenue or getting the open rates, that kind of thing. And they may see a trend over time, or they may just suddenly notice that, hey, like a year ago, we were getting 20% open rates and we're now getting 6% open rates. Like, what's up with that? So that's one of the ways that we see it come in. A complaint from a specific recipient, like whether it's the CMO who's just noticed that the email has gone into junk, or whether it's one of their recipients complaining, like, I missed out on this deal because I didn't see the email because it went to my spam folder. A single report from a recipient can be enough for them to start being like, okay, is there something like bigger going on here? And then the other way is obviously like everybody's least favorite way, but it shouldn't be, is an investigation by your friendly ESP compliance team. And people often see that as like a bad thing, like, oh no, here come the compliance police. But it's like, we're here to protect our clients. We're here to educate our clients. We're here to say like, oh, something's going wrong here, and we need to fix this. So that, like, and fundamentally, the whole idea behind it is like, we want people to be successful when they're sending their emails, right? So like, you know, it's an opportunity to, like, you know, using corporate speak, but yeah, compliance investigation, it's an opportunity for you to review your strategies. But it genuinely is, like, and you know, compliance teams often have to deal with a lot of not so fun conversations. So friendly reminder to be nice to your compliance investigator.
Yeah, and I will say, you know, it's funny because the compliance, you know, typically when you get compliance involved, it's because something is really going wrong, right? That's not just because your open rates are dipping a little low or your spam complaint rates a little high. It's because you're getting, you know, actual people complaining to the abuse desk, or because your spam complaint rates are to a point where it's, you know, you're going to get blocked. You're really going to cause some damage for yourself, or even just for that ESP's, you know, reputation themselves. So yeah, it's just, you use that as an opportunity, not just to kind of get in trouble and be put in the timeout corner, but really to learn something, to, you know, to be a better email sender, and to really just be able to hit the inbox in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be really concerned about, like, if I was using an ESP where there was like no compliance team or no investigations going on, especially if I'm like, I mean, even if I was on dedicated IPs, like the reputation of the whole range is like really super important, but especially on like shared IPs, like I'd be really super worried. It's like, so if I'm doing, like, I'm being a really good email marketer and doing all the good things, but if somebody else isn't, like, what's going to happen? Like, are you, like, how are you protecting everybody who's sending using your infrastructure? It's really super important.
Yeah, and it's funny because you know, we taught you actually mentioned a myth of blaming everything on your ESP and saying it's their fault that you're not going to the inbox. But I think that is the one case in which I would say it is the ESP's fault if you're not, you know, policing your platform, if you're not removing customers or kind of, you know, rate limiting customers if they are doing bad things within your platform. That is your responsibility. So yeah, I do think that that's one of those cases where if you just have people that are just spammers all around you, whether that's a shared IP or if it's just you're sharing a range, even on a dedicated IP, that is definitely going to impact you at some point. So
yeah, it's a question that I always say, you know, if you're going through like an RFP process, like one of the questions you should be asking like ESPs is like, what are your compliance processes? Like, and checking that they're vetting you back. Like if your ESP or prospective ESP is asking you a lot of questions about how you collect your data, how you manage your data, how you segment and target and all that kind of stuff, like you want to be asked those questions because they're asking everybody else who comes on board those same questions, right? Yeah. And that helps you know that the pool that you're going to go and swim in is pretty like nice and clean pool, right?
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, it is one of those where you kind of feel like you're getting grilled a little bit on the way in the door, but that really means that if you kind of get past that point, if you become a customer, you're setting yourself up for success with that ESP. So
yeah, totally.
Cool. All right. Okay. So I guess, do you have kind of like a specific workflow or questions that you might ask? So if somebody comes to you in any of those scenarios that you mentioned, whether it's a customer complaint or some other indication of a deliverability issue, like what would you ask? What information would you gather before you start giving recommendations?
Sure. I mean, first of all, we need to identify what the problem is, right? And if that's something like a block listing, that's super obvious. But other things can be a little bit more up in the air. So one of the really great questions is, are we seeing this for one recipient or many recipients? So is this just one complaint from your CMO for them, but overall we're looking at the open rate and the click-through rates and everything looks fine? Or are we get this complaint from the CMO and then we're seeing actually, yeah, there is a decline more generally. And then we want to look at, is this just one mailbox provider? Is this just like G Suite or Gmail or Hotmail? Or are we seeing this more kind of generally across the board? Because that's going to tell us one of two things, right? If we're seeing a problem with one specific mailbox provider, then we know that we've got a reputation issue, right, with that mailbox provider. But if we're seeing an overall trend across the board of like decreasing open rates and stuff, that's more likely to be a problem with your subject line and the content that you're sending out that needs a little bit of a refresh there. So that's where we start with. And also, like, when did this problem start? Because then we can start asking questions around like, what changed? So like, you know, this problem started on the 1st of June last year. Okay, was there anything that we changed on the 1st of June? Did we start adding a different source of data? Did we find a list of recipients on a floppy disk in a drawer somewhere that we've just imported in there? Did we change up our content in some way? All of those kind of things, so things to ask, so we can start identifying like, okay, where potentially is this problem coming on? Did we just do a big send to all, like just one time? We had to do one of those, like, what do they call them, coal mines, the court ordered and legally mandated, I forget the rest of the acronym, but like a terms and conditions update, and legal said we had to send it to everybody in our entire database, and just doing that one time can sometimes like really super tank reputation everywhere, right? And can cause some issues. So yeah, so we look for those changes, and then I start asking questions about, okay, let's talk about your data strategy. Let's talk about how you're collecting, when you're sunsetting, like how long does somebody not have to open? Like, do you as a marketer have a really good idea, a confident idea of what your sales cycle looks like and where your recipients are in your sales cycle, so that you are correctly targeting them with the right kind of content for where you need to meet people where they are, right? So are you doing that? Do you have enough data around that? But yeah, I mean, are you using riskier sources? Are you doing some kind of like verification when you collect data, removing typos? Are you doing confirmed or a double opt-in of some kind to make sure those email addresses are correct? So one of the places where we super see problems is point of sale collection of email addresses, which is becoming more common when we're allowed to go to stores anyway, which is, you know, do you want a paper receipt, or I can give you your email address and I'll email you the receipt, and then somebody through a mask is like trying to shout across the counter, potentially with some perspex in the way, like what their email address is, and you get like typos in there and stuff. So yeah, so then we're looking at all that kind of stuff, and yeah, and like, you know, are you removing people who haven't opened a single email in the last like however long? Are you doing my line manager Tanya Plaza, she always says that every business should be able to plot a graph of how long somebody has been on an email program without opening an email, and the likelihood that they're going to generate them any more revenue. Mm-hmm. And if you can plot that graph, you can then say, right, this is the time period after which the cost of keeping this recipient in my database, the risk of potential reputation damage if I send to them, has exceeded the likelihood that I'm going to generate any revenue from this person, and I can safely remove them from my database, or send them one last hurrah of, are you sure you don't want to receive the emails? But yeah, so making sure that like all of that kind of stuff is happening, and then we can go into like if we're still not finding the problem, we can go into deeper questions, and then we start talking about like the actual content, the links that are in the email, and doing some investigation on those to see whether there's poor reputation associated with them, asking around the use of affiliate content, or sending things out through other ESPs and stuff like that. And eventually we normally don't have to go quite that deep. Normally it's something much more obvious than that. Okay. But that's the kind of ballpark we're talking in.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, that sounds really complicated. So you're telling me there really isn't a bat phone that I can just call and...
Oh yeah. No, there's totally, like, let me just...
Yeah. I'll get the number from you afterwards. We'll keep it quiet. Nice. Okay. So and I think one thing that we hear, obviously you just mentioned a whole bunch of different ways that somebody could have an issue, and how you can detect it and the questions you should be asking. I guess, you know, one thing we hear often is like, well, my issue just showed up out of nowhere. Like all of a sudden we got blocked. Does that happen often? When does that happen? And I guess, what does that tell you if you're all of a sudden getting blocked versus, you know, is it usually something that's kind of building over time and they just didn't catch it until they got blocked, or like, what does that usually look like?
I mean, it depends. I think there are two scenarios like that. So one is the gradual building up over time. So you can sit for a while as a sender in a kind of reputation like gray area, where, you know, just enough of your emails are getting through and they're getting just about enough engagement to keep everything kind of ticking over and everything's kind of okay. And then you do another send, and that's just enough to tip it over the edge, and all of a sudden you're in the doghouse. So that is a thing that happens, and that can happen, but it's not a sudden thing. It looks like it's sudden, but it's really not. And it's quite difficult sometimes to have those conversations because it seems sudden to the client. And they're like, but we didn't do anything different this time. Like, we've been doing the same thing that we have been doing for the last 12 months. And then you're like, well, to be honest, that's probably it. That's probably the problem right there. Yeah, just that gradual degradation, that stagnation that we were talking about earlier has happened. And then sometimes, yes, we do all of a sudden see problems for like no apparent reason. And there's two kind of things. One of them is very mailbox provider specific, and the other one's kind of more general. The mailbox provider specific one is our good friends at UOD Microsofty. So the Hotmails and the Outlooks. This is more of a problem on dedicated IPs than tends to be on shared IPs. But so Microsoft have the SRD reports. So they've got their little group of like elite users who occasionally get sent an email, a random like market email or whatever, and they get to decide whether or not they would consider that email spam, or expected to be in the inbox. And then a lot of weighting is placed onto that. So you can, and I know because I've had this experience with warming IPs especially, is everything seems to be going fine, and then all of a sudden reputation throttling and blocking on an IP, and nothing has changed. Other IPs that are sending the same traffic totally fine. It's just one IP, and it's just the luck of the draw. There was just one or two too many of these SRD reports, and boom. Yeah, it's not great. And coming back from that is really hard. It involves pausing traffic for a long time and re-ramping. It's not fun. But that is very Microsoft specific, pretty specific use case, particularly for dedicated IPs. And it's really super kind of obvious. The symptoms of that are very obvious when it happens. The more common one is all of a sudden we're blocked everywhere, and we've just added a new data source, and this data source is rented or purchased. And all of a sudden it's just spam trap central. And then it's, if you hit some of the worst ones, and you know, especially our like good friends over at like Spam House who take this stuff like super seriously, you're in for all of a sudden sad times. But in those cases, it's super easy to resolve in that you just stop sending to that rented or purchased data.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least you know the cause, and so you can very quickly just pull it back out and say, "Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
Please forgive me." Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Okay. Well, you mentioned spam traps, so maybe it's a good time to kind of just dip in there quickly and kind of just talk a little bit about spam traps. You know, there's a couple of different types, so you can kind of just, you know, walk us through what the different types are, maybe if there is one that's more damaging or more dangerous for deliverability. You know, basically, how should people use spam traps as like an indicator for a deliverability issue or resolving one?
Sure. So there are a few different types of traps. So there's a typo traps. So this is where somebody will purchase the domain like gmail.com, for example, as opposed to gmail.com. And so people go around and they purchase these kind of common typo domains that people might accidentally write, and then they set them up as traps. And what this indicates is that people sending to these traps, their data collection is not as tight as it could be, and especially that they're not doing some kind of either a direct like API verification on their form, or some kind of verification on the point of sign up that corrects this, or, you know, just make that suggestion to user, like, you put in gmail.com, did you mean gmail.com? And it also indicates somebody who's sending to lists where they haven't done like a confirmed or a double opt-in verification. So they haven't, you know, if you send that email to say, are you sure you want to subscribe with this email address, and you send it to Gmail, that's going to bounce, and then you're going to be like, yeah, no, we're not going to send to that. If you're not doing some kind of like confirmed opt-in or double opt-in verification, that's going to make its way onto your list. So the typo traps are good for indicating, yeah, we've got a little bit of a looseness around our data collection here that we can tighten up a bit. Recycle traps are old domains or old inboxes that have bounced. They should bounce for like 6 to 12 months, give a hard bounce to say this isn't a thing anymore. And then after that, they can be converted into traps. So this can indicate like a couple of things. One is that you're not doing proper data management, data hygiene. So either you're not removing hard bounces from your lists when you send to them, and you're not emailing your lists regularly, because it's important to, you don't send an email, it can't bounce, so you have to be emailing kind of everybody regularly. It can indicate that you've dug an old list out of the filing cabinet somewhere and stuck that in and tried to send to everybody. And it can indicate that you're not keeping up to date with who's opening and clicking your emails and stuff, and not removing them. It's pretty normal to have some recycled traps in a mature marketing list, but we wouldn't expect to be seeing a huge number. We especially wouldn't be expecting to see a huge number of recycled traps ending up in like a new data source. So you get a new data source plugged in, and then you've got loads of like recycled traps in there. That's a sign that data source is stale. But getting a few of these here and there sometimes in your lists is going to happen if you've been doing email marketing for a while.
Okay.
Pristine traps are the interesting ones, because these are traps that are these are mailboxes that will never have signed up to receive any kind of marketing material. They are set up from scratch to be spam trap addresses. And these are the ones that are most concerning. These are the ones that tend to cause the most problems, because if you're sending to people to email addresses that will never legitimately sign up to receiving emails, how you can't get consent from the person who owns that email address. So how's it ended up in your list? And normally this is like one of two ways. This is normally like purchase data, because this is what these kind of traps, they're not going to bounce, they are just going to let you send. So if you purchase data and even running it through like a validation type service, unless a validator knows that this particular one is a trap, the email will be accepted. So if you're just validating an email address via whether or not the SMTP transaction is successful and the mail is accepted for delivery, you're not going to pick up that this is a trap. So a lot of the time it's some kind of rental or purchase data kind of situation. Brokers will pad out their lists with all sorts of nonsense, and these can be one of those. They can be hidden in like the HTML of websites and things. So if you've got crawlers that are going through websites looking for email addresses, they're going to pick up these lovely pristine traps. And you can also get them again if you don't have if you've got an unsecured sign-up form and you've got somebody who's a little bit malicious, like especially with those like little website popovers that are really annoying, when you've been on the website for like 2 seconds and you haven't even scrolled to the product, and all of a sudden it's like, sign up for our newsletter, and maybe you get a bit annoyed, and so you pop a little email address in there, and maybe it's a pristine trap, and maybe they don't have confirmed opt-in, and oh no. So pristine traps are probably the worst, but there are, depending on who they're run by, this is the other thing, because spam trap networks can be run by, the anti-abuse players out there, so Spam Cop and Sorbs and Spam House and all those awesome people looking after us on the internet. So they can run those, but also vendors, deliverability vendors, even some ESPs run their own like trap networks. So there's a difference between what I like to call indicator traps and problem traps. So an indicator trap is normally run by either run by a vendor or like an ESP, somewhere like that, where they're giving you some data about how many traps like you're hitting and stuff. Or I would say some of the block lists that aren't used a lot by mailbox providers to actually stop mail coming through. So for example, SORBs block listings are great indicators. They don't have a super big impact on whether or not you get delivered, apart from some B2B type emailings that use SORBs. But in general, if you're getting blocklisted by like SORBs, or if you're hitting traps that are run by your ESP or your deliverability vendor, that's an indicator that something is going wrong.
Yeah.
The problem traps are the one that you hit, and they're run by Spamcop or Spamhaus, or they're run by a mailbox provider themselves, and they are used to actually either throttle your emails, jump your emails, or outright block your emails. Those are the problems. And what we can do is we can use the indicator traps to stop us from hitting the problem traps. And so we can clean up our act and get things sorted before we run into actual issues that are hurting our revenue generation.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's, that's one differentiation that I'm so happy that you brought that up, because I think it's, people look at traps, within like Kickboxes, we have our own spam trap network, and people say, yeah, but those are sensor traps. That's not going to affect my deliverability. That's not going to, prevent my messages from going to the inbox. But how do you know that, right? Like if we see that all of a sudden there's a huge spike in your spam trap hits within our network, chances are there's also an increase within those networks that do matter, like Spamhaus and Spamcop and ones like that. So I think it's a matter of using that data properly and using it to kind of trace the issue back to the source, as opposed to just saying, oh, I see that we've got 100 spam traps on our list. Let's go remove those, and now our issue is magically gone. Like that's not really how it works, right? So yeah, so I think that's, they are helpful, but they're not meant to just be the only thing that you need to do, right? So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, yeah, for every one spam trap that you remove that is one that you know about, there are 10, 20, 50, 100 traps in that list that you don't know are traps. Right. That you're then going to be emailing. So yeah, absolutely, like totally agree with you there. It's telling you something's going awry. Don't like. The idea isn't to segment your list into smaller and smaller lists and send to each one and see if you hit a trap with this one. No, you need to go back. You need to figure out, like, how did these traps get in here to start with? Where is the weakness in my strategy? Let's fix that.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. That sounds good. Okay. So I know so we talked about spam traps. I'd like to also, as you being the delivery expert, talk a little bit about bounces. Like, can you just kind of walk us through a bit of information that people should really care about when it comes to bounces and how those affect deliverability and delivery?
Yeah. So bounces are emails that haven't been delivered, and they can occur in two different places. So they can occur during the SMTP transaction, which is when, like, during the connection. So during the SMTP transaction, you've got your sending mail server and your receiving mail server, like Yahoo, and the servers are talking to each other to get the email sent across, and then the receiving server says, now I'm not accepting this, and so that's a bounce that happens during that transaction. And then the second type of bounce is the asynchronous bounce that happens afterwards. So during the SMTP transaction, the email is relayed and it's accepted by the receiving mail server, but then for some reason a little bit later on, the receiving mail server actually says, you know what, actually now, and chucks it back. So synchronous and asynchronous bounces, and then you've got hard and soft bounces, and you've also got like a third type of interim throttling kind of bounce that happens during SMTP. I'll get to that anyway. But the hard and the soft bounces, so a hard bounce is normally something that is a permanent problem. So we're looking mostly at this mailbox does not exist. That is like the typical hard bounce thing, and we would normally say if it comes back with a hard bounce, which is normally a 5.xx error code, that's going to be we don't want to be emailing this person again. There's a caveat, I'll get to that. And then we have the soft bounces, which tend to be temporary issues. So things like this person has gone on holiday for 2 weeks and their inbox is full. Though that would be an example. Or maybe you might be on a block list somewhere and they might say, we're just not going to accept this mail at the moment because you're on this block list. Maybe go and fix that and then maybe we'll accept your mail later. That could be another reason for a soft bounce. So soft bounces are the 4.xx error codes, and they tend to be more temporary. I say tend to be with both of these because bounce codes are not standardized, and so sometimes we will see temporary things that come back that are temporary problems that come back with a 5.xx code, and sometimes we will see things that we know are a more permanent possibly issue that will come back with a 4.xx code. And then the content of the error messages themselves, the reason for the bounce. Some mailbox providers are more explicit and some are complete black box and you've got no idea. So sometimes you can get some really useful information in the bounce, like tell you you're on a spam block list, for example. And sometimes the information is completely and utterly useless and you have just like no idea, and you just have to trust that the 5 or the 4 is the correct thing to do with that. So the big thing is that ignoring bounces is a surefire way to damage your reputation. So sending to a lot of email addresses that hard bounce because they don't exist, that is bad, because that tells the mailbox provider that you are probably not getting consent from people before you send emails to them, because email addresses that don't exist don't consent to receiving emails. But at the same time, ignoring soft bounces can also be an issue, because they can tell you about some reputation problems. They can tell you about things slowing down. One of the kind of intermediate other kind of bounce is what I referred to as a deferral. This happens during the SMTP transaction. So the servers are connected together and your recipient server will say to the sending server, not right now, try again later. And that can be for a bunch of different reasons, and it can be something as like innocuous as just like I'm so super busy right now, can you just give me 5, and then I'll have some resources and I'll be able to do this. And that can go all the way up to like, dude, like the email you've been sending me has been really terrible and you're not allowed to send this many terrible emails, so like slow down how many terrible emails you're sending me. And that again is really super useful information. This can result eventually in a hard or a soft bounce if it keeps going, but in general, if you get a deferral during the SMTP transaction, the sending mail server is just kind of configured to retry that and keep retrying it for like 48 hours, or however long your ESP decided. 48 hours is normally long enough to see if eventually it'll be accepted. There are some times when I choose to like ignore this. So I know, for example, that some mailbox providers where they have like, especially where they have like a large, they give their users like a large amount of space to use, like they give them several gig full of space for their inbox, right? If I get back from one of those mailbox providers, the user quota is like full, like they've used up all their space, I'm like, they've got like 25 gig of space. That's an abandoned inbox right there. Like that's probably not going to be used. So I'm more likely to say, let's soft bounce this. Let's see if this happens again. This is not something that's going to be dealt with probably in the next 24 to 48 hours. So let's just like soft bounce it. The next time we send, we'll see if it gets delivered. So there's no standardization. So you get to make some fun decisions about this, but it's super important, like throttling SMTP errors, like throttling and deferral errors during SMTP is super important to pay attention to. Sometimes you need to slow down. It's especially important during ramp up when you're ramping up an IP or a domain. Sometimes you just need to slow down. If you're sending too fast, like slow down a little bit. There's loads of useful information, but ignore bounces and deferrals at your peril.
Yeah. And I think that's one, especially with like a Gmail, they tend to push most of the mail to the spam folder, right? Like they don't actually block a lot of mail until you get to the point where your sender reputation is very bad, or there's something seriously wrong with your email, right? So if you all of a sudden are starting to see blocks at Gmail, I think that's definitely something that says, hey, there's something seriously wrong here. Go fix that, right? So
yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, let's maybe focus a little bit on the resolution side of things. So I guess first of all, I guess like how long does it normally take to solve a deliverability issue? Like, is it, I know that it's a painful process for people, especially when they're getting blocked. So yeah, I guess you must hear this question a lot. Like, when's my issue going to be solved?
Yeah, and I'm gonna give my like Batman villain answer here, which is, how long is a piece of string? Um, it depends. Like, how willing are you to do the hard work to figure out what the problem is and then get it fixed? How much resource do you have to be able to sort out problems with, like, getting a web dev to redesign a form or something like that, or getting your email devs to like redesign content to be more engaging? How much buy-in do you have from your C-level? How much power do you have as a marketer to choose who you're sending emails to? Or are you going to have to convince layers of management that that sending fewer emails is actually going to be better in like the long run? What is the problem? Is it something like, with Microsoft, or is it something at Gmail? Microsoft is probably going to take a lot longer, a lot more time to resolve problems at Gmail due to differences in how they filter and how they build reputation and stuff like that. So it is, it really does depend on so many factors, some of which are just the critical factors of making the changes, but some of which are more organizational challenges around getting buy-in from other teams, getting buy-in from senior people. It's one of those things where I have like a lot of empathy for customers who are really struggling with this, especially when it's stuff coming from like the top down, because it's really hard for them. They're trying so hard, and it's difficult for them to make the changes they need to make.
Yeah, and so I guess, I mean, like, I'd imagine the knee-jerk reaction is just sort of like, well, go file a ticket with Hotmail, get it resolved, get them to remove it, call the bat phone. So I guess, does that work? When should people be reaching out to postmasters? And I guess, especially if you are having to kind of manage upwards into an organization where you have to get buy-in, like how do you do that? What's the best way to go about all that?
Yeah, so postmasters help those who help themselves. So if you are not taking a look at what you're doing and at least attempting to demonstrate that you are making changes, postmasters are not good. They're not going to want to know. And even, some of them, especially the larger ones, even if you have good intentions and you're starting to show improvement, like they want to see it all fixed before they're going to jump in. And the more you email them and chase them and poke them, especially if you are not actually putting into action things, the less likely they are to help you. Postmasters are people. At some, like, there's a lot of them has like various like algorithms and things that kind of handle like initial responses. We're all familiar with Microsoft's support mitigation process. It takes a while to get to a human being, but eventually you're talking to a person, right? And that person is going to be more willing to help you if you have done everything you can to resolve the problem, and you can provide evidence that you've done everything that you can to resolve the problem. And if you are kind and polite when you're contacting them. So we rarely, if ever, get to the stage of having to actually contact a postmaster for any of the mailbox providers. And quite frankly, a lot of the time it's like shouting into the void, because you don't always get a response. Like sometimes you shout into the void and then things are suddenly magically fixed. Sometimes you shout into the void and nothing happens, and then you think, okay, we haven't fixed this problem on our end. So reach out to postmasters extraordinarily sparingly. If it's your first port of call, you got the wrong tactics there, my friend. And only do it when you are really super confident that you have addressed all of like the fundamental best practice kind of issues that you possibly can before you start reaching out, because otherwise you think spammers don't send emails to postmasters asking for their messages to be let through? Like, of course they do. That's why Gmail and Microsoft and everybody has all these complex and fantastical algorithms that decide whether or not your mail is junk based on all these user interactions and stuff, because the user interactions with your emails are a lot more accurate indicator of whether or not you are sending wanted email or sending spam than one person working as a postmaster looking at a sample of your email and deciding whether or not it should go through. So make sure you're confident, use it sparingly, and when you do, remember that you're dealing with an actual human being and treat them as such.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's, I almost see this as like a credit system where it's like you've got a certain number of credits and you can use them, and you should use them very sparingly, because once they run out, you've got a problem, right? So it's like maybe you can get that block removed by being like, oh, we did something, we changed something, please. You just beg, right? They might remove that block one time, but if your issue comes right back and they're just playing whack-a-mole and they're having to just keep blocking you, and then you say you fixed it and then you go back to business, they're not going to be willing to remove that block the next time. It's just going to be that much harder, and you're going to have to do that much more to kind of get back in their good graces. So it really is that respectful approach that you really need to focus on. So love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, great. Well, let's see. Well, you specifically touched on Hotmail, which is a painful destination for a lot of people. So I guess, do you have any tips? I think this probably folds into what you were just saying, but do you have any tips specifically for people that are frustrated with how long it takes to maybe resolve an issue there versus some other destination?
Yeah, so with Hotmail and Microsoft in general, engagement really does seem to be a key factor, is sending to people who are reliably opening. And almost always when we have real problems with open rates and things at Microsoft, it is an engagement problem, and it requires sort of laser targeting on really recent engagers, people who've opened and clicked emails really super recently, and just focusing on them and really like targeting that content to get that great engagement. With Microsoft, it's a case of persisting. So they do have these various levels, and oftentimes the first response you're going to get is going to be some kind of auto reject, like more information needed, we can't find any reason why your IP isn't delivering, or IP does not qualify for mitigation at this time, which is the automatic or the automated response that hasn't come from a human. And you have to, and you sometimes have to go through several levels of backwards and forwards until you get to a human being, and then a human being who can actually help. So you need to be persistent. Try and be quick with your responses. Don't let the ticket go dead, because you have to start that process all over again if the ticket goes dead. But be reasonably patient. But if you haven't heard back on a ticket, as if it's not a weekend and you haven't heard back on a ticket for 48 hours, do a little chaser, but a nice, polite, like empathetic kind of little like, hey, things might fall off the radar kind of thing. And using the phrase or the word specifically escalate or escalation, and mitigate or mitigation, that seems to feed the algorithm they use for organizing their tickets or whatever, and get it in front of the people who need to see it. And always including the IP that you're sending from, or the domain that you're sending from, always including any bounce error you might get back, including the alphanumeric gibberish that's included in that, because yeah, it's important for them to be able to find things on their system and understand what they're looking at. But it's patience and it's persistence, and it's one of those things where it really is better. I mean, it's always better to not have the problem, but really with Microsoft, it's really better to be putting in place all of the best practice things you need to do now before you have any problems, to try and prevent having any problems, because it is much easier to keep that momentum going than it is to claw yourself back after Microsoft issues.
For sure. Oh, I love that. Cool. Okay. Well, that pretty much settles that one. And I think it's definitely painful dealing with Hotmail. And that process feels so intense because you have your management or somebody kind of on your back saying like, hey, fix it now. What's taking so long? It's everyone's going through it. So just kind of hang in there, I guess. Cool. Okay. Well, I think we've pretty much covered a lot of stuff here that's on, finding your issues with deliverability and finding paths to resolving those. So, Tam, I guess I just kind of have one more question for you, more for like a personal one. And this is kind of more about like, career advice, right? So if we've got some people that are sort of, coming into this field, if they're crazy enough to join us in the email deliverability space, what advice would you give to them to sort of just to really have an awesome career, to be successful? What's your tip?
I mean, first of all, hi, welcome. You are very welcome. The more the merrier. Please reach out on LinkedIn and Twitter and come and talk to me and say hi. So that would be my first thing. I think the biggest thing when you're coming into like working in this is whether you're working client-facing, deliverability, whether you're less client facing, you're working in delivery, managing expectations is so super important, especially when it comes to dealing with deliverability challenges, or as an ESP onboarding new clients and they're ramping up on dedicated IPs, or they're ramping up on a new sending domain, setting and managing client expectations or colleague expectations working internally around the challenges that they can expect to face, the fact that changes are gonna need to be made, the time and patience it's gonna take, like really clearly being really open, being honest, transparent, authentic, upfront about what they can expect as you work through the challenge is so important. They appreciate that honesty. Everybody appreciates somebody who's honest and authentic, and you'd rather hear upfront that this is going to take a bit of time than learn that however many weeks or months down the line, especially if you're having to report this up to somebody higher. It allows you to really thoroughly do investigations and really work with them to get to the bottom of it. And it allows you to really to work with them on their whole strategy and set them up for success for months and years to come. If you can set those expectations up front to say, look, it's going to be fun. This is going to be a learning opportunity. It's going to be an exciting challenge. But I want to work with you and we're going to do this, but it's not going to be a quick and easy process. And it's much easier to do that and set that expectation at the beginning than it is to try and reset expectations later on. This is an industry where we have to have some really difficult conversations. We have to tell clients sometimes and senders, sometimes we have to tell things that they don't really want to hear. And those conversations are much easier. I don't like confrontation. I'm terrible at confrontation. Like, don't shout at me, I will cry. So like managing those and setting those expectations up front is a really great way to avoid having to have those confrontations later on. So that is the one thing I would say.
Yeah, I think that is so helpful. And it is interesting, especially, when you're working for an ESP and you're dealing with sales teams, right? And sales teams are trying to highlight how wonderful it's going to be when they come switch to your ESP. And they kind of, they overlook that whole IP warm-up process and, the domain process as well. The fact that you need to go through a warm-up and kind of reset everything. I think I had a conversation with a salesperson once who was like, well, so we have a client who wants to come on board, but they want to send 20 million messages on day one from their dedicated IP. What do we do? And I said, you need to tell them that's not possible. And she was like, but I don't know how to tell them that. And I'm like, you got to tell them that, because if you don't tell them that, they're going to actually switch to us. And then we're going to be stuck with this really painful conversation, this thing that's not possible. Right. So I think giving that lay of the land up front to say, this is how it works. This is what's a realistic plan. Here's our conservative plan. If you want to go more aggressive, okay, but we're on record saying we think that that's a little bit dangerous and here's why. So let's plan some contingencies and whatever else, right? So yeah, totally agree. It definitely is a lot easier to kind of, even if they don't listen to you, just say it, right? Be on record saying what really is possible and what's not, right?
Especially when you're right at the beginning of the client ESP relationship like that with onboarding or a client vendor relationship, like setting the tone. I think it was Steve Henderson at Amasis who was talking about like changing ESPs and setting expectations in the same way as he was having his kitchen renovated. And he was like, I'm halfway through a kitchen renovation. My sink is a cardboard box. We are cooking on a small gas, like camping stove. And I just like, I can't wait for it all to be done.
Right.
But they told me at the beginning that there was going to be a period of several weeks where I wouldn't have a proper kitchen sink and I wouldn't have a camping stove. And they gave some expectations of how long it would take. And they are updating me and we're on track. And, you know, it's taken some time, but I know this is going to be amazing when it's done. And they've told me everything up front. So as much as I'm like not liking it and it's not the situation I would want to be in, it's okay. I'm not mad at them. I'm not resentful. I'm not feeling anything like that towards them because everything was set up front. Yeah. And I often think about Steve in his kitchen when we got new clients onboarding and stuff, and just like, yeah, setting those expectations about gonna be a while. You don't have a kitchen sink.
Yeah, that is a great visual. That's a really cool analogy. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, and thanks Steve for, I guess, renovating your kitchen. So yeah. All right. Well, cool. I guess Email Geeks, I think we did it. We've come to the end of another episode. So, you know, hopefully by now, after listening to us have this conversation, you're having a better understanding of kind of how to diagnose your deliverability issues, as well as how to resolve them, which is, I think, the most important part, right? It's not always an easy process. In fact, it takes a lot of steps, a lot of asking questions, a lot of gathering information. But it really, you know, if you're able to kind of improve your email program as opposed to just kind of looking for shortcuts and trying to get that quick win, your email program is really going to kind of succeed in the long run because of that. Not to mention, you might be able to resolve your deliverability issues more quickly, and maybe even one day start preventing them from even happening in the first place, which is just maybe it means I don't have a job and Tam doesn't have a job one day, but we'd love that if it means that your emails are going to the inbox without our help. So yeah, so I guess, you know, if this is the first episode that you folks are tuning into, I will give a call out to note that we are actually now on a lot of different podcasting platforms. So you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Anchor. We've got 8 different episodes. This is number 8, but go check out all the other ones if you haven't yet. And honestly, thank you so much for being here, Tam. It was really fun chatting with you, and I hope our audience learned a lot.
It's been awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right. Well, talk to you soon.
Okay.